Hello, everybody. I'm Neville, and I am operating the Zoom, and we will start at 8:30, and I am just getting organized, and we're waiting for Dr. Azzeh, and we will get the show on the road. And you can see Naomi, she's there. I'll just pin her video for a moment to see. You can wave to everybody, Naomi. Thank you. Now I have to unpin you. Okay, there. Cool. All right. And I have muted everybody, and I'll unmute the speakers. You can use the chat box if you want to use the chat box. And just so you know, we are also broadcasting this on YouTube live, and if you want to share the link to the YouTube, I will put it in the chat box shortly. Okay, or at least somebody else. Gabby, can you pop it into the chat box? Because thank you. All right. I don't know where you all are. We have got so far 27 people on the call. We still have 9 minutes to go. There's the link in the chat box for those that want to see. I'm going to go back to the greeting screen for the time being. Raymond. I can't see you, Raymond. Skolny. Folks, while we're waiting, I just want to ensure that you are all aware of the petition that is running currently. I'm going to put the link in the chat box now. Just a moment. Oh, I am unmuted. Oh, unmute you, Basil. Okay. Oh, David. David, can you put your video on, please? There you are. Okay. It says I need to ask you to unmute.
Great.
Live.
Hi, Neville. Can you hear me?
Yes.
How are you doing? Excellent. Great. Do we have Naomi and Bashar on the line?
I have Naomi. I don't see Bashar yet.
Okay.
There's Naomi.
Shalom, Naomi.
I have to unmute her. Hold on.
Nice to meet you. We have actually, I think, met once before, but very good to meet you online.
Raymond, do you want to talk to the petition? You have to unmute, or at least I have to ask you to unmute, or you have to unmute yourself, I believe. I don't know how to unmute Dave, Raymond.
Hi, Neville. I think you've made the point already. Shalom,
Okay.
everybody. We have a petition that focuses on anti-annexation, and we have close to 400 people that have signed it so far. But it would be really good to have a higher number, and that we can leverage off that. So the intent is to submit that to the Israeli ambassador. But we'd also like to demonstrate that there is a grouping within the South African Jewish community that doesn't agree with everything that the Israeli government does. And the larger that number becomes, the more attention, that this can get. So, it would be great if you read the petition, and if you feel comfortable to sign it, to do so if you haven't done so yet.
Thank you. There's a note here to show you that if you have the app, it says speaker view if you want to see the speaker, but I will pin the video of the speaker so that you can see it. We are still waiting for Bashar. If you are here, Bashar, you need to let me know. I don't see you. So we've still got another 2 minutes until we really start, or at least the official start time. So we'll see how we go. And I recommend that you switch off, unless you're a speaker, that you switch off your videos so that you have more bandwidth to watch the speakers. But it's not essential. Oh, there's Bashar. Bashar, I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you are.
Yeah, I'm all ready.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to hand over to David, who is going to share the event. And I will keep everybody muted except the speakers, and I shall try to pin the speaker when they are speaking. Okay, so see you all later.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Bashar.
Good evening. How are you?
David Welch, it's very nice to meet you.
Very happy to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, my heart is in South Africa.
Ah, fantastic. Have you visited South Africa?
Many times. I love it. It's a wonderful place.
Fantastic, fantastic.
And I'm sorry for being late, but I just made it back to the office. So
we know you had another commitment, so we're very, very glad.
Well, you're not late. It's exactly 8:30.
Exactly.
I I propose that we wait another minute or two. We have 56 participants so far.
And I do know there are people watching on YouTube as well. People told me they're watching on YouTube. So yeah. So let's just wait a little while. Naomi, are you unmuted as well? Neville, I think it would be important to unmute Naomi, but maybe after Bashar
I
is.
think I'm unmuted now.
Ah, there we go. Excellent.
Thank you.
Shalom. Hi, Naomi.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Welcome.
Good
Thank
evening.
you for being with us.
Hello, Bashar.
How are you? I'm happy to be with you here because I hear a lot about you. I've been reading a lot of what you write, and it's an honor to be with you.
Same here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So that's nice. South Africa bringing people together as well, right? Haven't met before. Great. Okay, so we just wait another minute or two, and then we'll begin. Are we still getting some people to admit? Yeah, I see the participant list going up. Okay, well, perhaps we should get going then. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second Jewish Democratic Initiative online panel discussion for 2020. We hope that you are all well and staying healthy. The Jewish Democratic Initiative strives for an inclusive South African Jewish community that is committed to social justice and advocates for a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. JDI is made up of Jews who not only are not hostile to Israel, but are deeply committed to seeing it flourish based on universal principles of justice and its own original vision as outlined in its Declaration of Independence. It is for this reason that many in JDI are actively opposed to decisions taking Israel in a manner which harms its own interests, violates fundamental rights, and harms the prospect of peace between Israelis and Palestinians. We organized the seminar the night before the coalition agreement between Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz explicitly allows for the possibility that a decision can be taken by the Israeli government unilaterally to annex part of the West Bank. We are still unclear about the exact proposal for what such annexation would involve, from settlements such as Ma'ale Adumim to the entire Jordan Valley. Either way, it would represent an attempt by Israel unilaterally, without any negotiation, to change its borders. Just today, over 120 Jewish legal academics and jurists from across the world released a letter clearly stating that such a move would represent a grave breach of international law. I'm happy to have been involved in organizing that. The letter recognized the infringement that this would represent to the Palestinian right to self-determination, as well as potential violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law. It also warns of serious consequences for Israel under international law, which could include measures taken by other states and even individual liability. Similar initiatives have been taking place across the world. In South Africa, the South African Union for Progressive Judaism has come out strongly against unilateral annexation. JDI has itself organized a petition that has been signed by almost 400 members of the South African Jewish community and counting, and hopefully tonight we'll have many more, including prominent business people, community leaders, and individuals. We are hoping, as I've said, more of you will sign this petition tonight, and it is important to recognize that if you are a friend of Israel, it is important to stand up against it making a mistake of this magnitude. The JDI committee felt that the night before things could change so substantially, it would be important to hear perspectives from the region on unilateral annexation and its consequences. And so we are very fortunate to be joined by two eminent panelists to give their perspective from Palestine and Israel, respectively. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Professor David Bilches, for those who don't know me. I'm a professor of fundamental rights and constitutional law at the University of Johannesburg and director of the South African Institute for Advanced Constitutional Law. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, who will be Bashar Azzeh, who is a leading entrepreneur and activist in Palestine. Born and raised in Jerusalem, Mr. Azzeh has worked closely on the development of the Palestinian economy through entrepreneurship, the development of the social sector, and through the initiation of various NGOs. Mr. Azzeh worked as planning director for the past 2 years of the Palestine investment conferences and a business development manager of various international economic development projects. On the economic front, Mr. Azzeh is a founding board member of the Al-Quds holding company in Jerusalem and is owner and chair of Deal Marketing. Mr. Azzeh is a member of the PLO Palestine National Council, and he is a board secretary of the Palestine British Business Council. On the social front, Mr. Azzeh is the founder and chair of the Al-Makdi's Association for Economic Development in Jerusalem, founder and chair of the Jerusalem Business Development Center, founder and chair of the RR Youth Center in Hebron, and co-founder of the Palestine Sport for Life organization. Incredible amount of organizations you've been involved with, and we look forward to hearing from you, Bashar. And the second speaker I'll introduce now, and so we'll move seamlessly after Bashar is speaking. Each speaker said they will speak for between 15 and 20 minutes. So is Naomi Hazan. Naomi Hazan is a professor emerita of political science and African studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So wonderful to have you in an African discussion around these questions, Naomi. Together with Professor Hannah Herzog, she established the Center for the Advancement of Women in the Public Sphere at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute in 2009, where she has been a research fellow ever since. She served as a chair of the Truman Research Institute for the Advancement of Peace at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Professor Hazan has also served as a member of the Knesset for 3 terms on behalf of the Meretz Party. She was, in fact, deputy speaker of the Knesset. Naomi Hazan was also one of the founders of the Israel Women's Network and served as president of the New Israel Fund and as a member of its international board. Thank you so much, Naomi, for joining with us. It's so good to have you. And both speakers, I've given a précis of their very extensive CVs, so they will forgive me if I couldn't go through this all extensively. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bashar. Bashar, please, 15 to 20 minutes, please tell us about your perspective on this potential, we don't still 100% know what's going to happen, but measure of unilateral annexation that's being discussed by the Israeli government.
Thank you, my friend. I'm happy to be listening to you and also see what you have been active into trying to stop annexation. First of all, I want to say that a lot of people are trying to undermine the role of people like yourselves in stopping annexation, the role of the Jewish community, progressives, non-progressives who are against annexation, people who are pro-human rights, people who are pro-peace, who are pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. And I think your role has been tremendous in bringing us to tomorrow where no annexation will be announced, at least tomorrow, because even inside Israel, they cannot get still an agreement with the Americans on what to annex. So I want to be reaffirming as a Palestinian political figure, as a Palestinian individual, that the work of the Jewish community in the West by people like yourselves is really appreciated in the West Bank and Gaza, is appreciated by Palestinians. And I think we have a long way to go and work together in trying to stop any unilateral actions that violate human rights and civil rights for the Palestinians. We need to work together for peace. And I think this is very important. And I hope that we can work more and more in the near future on this. So I really thank you. I thank the viewers in South Africa and other places who are watching this, taking a minute out of their time to understand the reality, the negative reality that annexation will place on the life of Palestinians and how much it will be reflecting on you as a Jewish community, on Israelis if annexation takes place. So I really, really thank you. Now, to get into the hot potato, I would like to just give a brief about how we as Palestinians view annexation. As an ordinary Palestinian who's going to be traveling inside the West Bank and will see the effect of it on daily life. We see it based on more advancement of the existing process of land confiscation. Regardless of which measure of annexation, which level of annexation will happen, we will see more and more land confiscation of Palestinian private property that will be used under the new annexation law of claiming that this is an Israeli territory. People are worried about their land, worried about the rights to their land. This is a real violation of this land ownership issue that is already happening in the West Bank, and it will increase by annexation. The second issue is human rights, civil rights movement issue and rights. It's clear that people who are probably might be affected and annexed into this new annexation process, even if it is a small number of people in some enclaves that must be annexed, at least within the small or large size of annexation, will not be given any rights. We heard Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that we will not give any rights to Palestinians in those annexed territory, meaning more civil rights, human rights violation of those Palestinians. This is not good. We are talking about Palestinians inside Israel rights who are fighting for more rights as citizens, and now you will have people who are going to be living in limbo with no rights and no civil rights and human rights. This is clearly a problem that most people are undermining, that those people will be living in a limbo of lack of civil rights and human rights, adding to the lack of human rights, civil rights to Palestinians who live in the West Bank. We also see that this also will reflect on access and movement issue. If let's assume Beit Il, the famous settlement that Mr. Friedman is supporting its annexation, which is in the heart of the West Bank, right across from the border of Ramallah, will be annexed. The road that will lead to this settlement will become part of the Israeli state. It means that Palestinians will have less roads that they can drive on, and those roads will be only driven by Israeli settlers, so creating more and more separation, appetite, and prejudiced approach toward even simple access and movement issue that does not exist anywhere in the world. We will see more roads that is actually only dedicated to those settlements, and less roads dedicated to the Palestinians. The Palestinians will have to make detours and bypasses through under tunnels in order to create the right path for the settlers to move into those settlements, which will be part of the Israeli state. By default, Palestinians will not have rights to drive on. We also will see more and more very important issue. It is more control of natural resources. If Jordan Valley is annexed, the Jordan Valley, many people don't understand this. This is very important. It's the agricultural basket of Palestinians. Our cucumbers, tomatoes, our vegetables, our fruits come from the Jordan Valley. Over 80% of our vegetables and food, daily food, comes from the Jordan Valley. Annexation of the Jordan Valley will be placing the Palestinians out of this basket, out of the supply of the daily basic vegetables and fruits, and meaning that going into annexation in various measures will bring more territorial Israeli annexation, meaning that this area will become part of the state of Israel, giving them more right to dig wells and to control natural resources of water and aquifers on this critical area, especially the Jordan Valley and even the settlement blocks, where Palestinians will be deprived from the rights to more water. Actually, we will get less water. And also it will kill our dream of having more natural resources from the Jordan Valley because Jordan Valley is a very flat area. And this is one of the best areas for us to place our solar system to generate electricity for the Palestinian territory. And if the Jordan Valley is being annexed, I'm telling you this now, not as a politician, as a businessman, it will kill our ability to self-sustain power by getting solar systems in the Jordan Valley. Now, this is not even taking into consideration the expected displacement of a lot of people communities who are living in the Jordan Valley, and a lot of communities who are close to settlements. Because if they make a buffer zone around settlements, creating an Israeli presence of a state and state land law on this settlements buffer area, that people will have to move. And this will create what we are worried about is a new transfer of people from specific spots to inside the area A and B territory, which is already an intense populated area. Annexation in all forms is a new devastation for the Palestinians. It's a new form of telling the Palestinians your rights to build a state is over. Even, just to give you an example, many people are saying, oh, it's okay if there's going to be a light annexation. Ma'aleh Adumim, Gosh Etzion, and Ara'el. But Ma'aleh Adumim, the annexation of Ma'aleh Adumim, and what we call the Area E1, which is connected between Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim, will end the two-state solution. Because for any contiguous Palestinian state in the West Bank, you need this area to create the contiguity of land from the north and south of the West Bank. Placing Ma'ale Adumim and the area from Ma'ale Adumim to inside Jerusalem into the sovereignty of Israel will end the Palestinian dream of a contiguous state. Yes, in the American plan, you might have a state, but it will be a state of islands, a state of cantons that will never be contiguous. So even the light scenario of 8% of the West Bank, which is the area between the wall and the green line, this is where it's even supported by people like Gantz, will end the two-state solution and end the Palestinian state. Now, what are the Palestinians doing? And what are we doing to stop this? First of all, before I start about what we're doing, we have seen a move, and I will leave my favorite professor to give more of what's going on in Israel, but we have seen a civil society in Israel that's moving against annexation above the expectations of Palestinians. People think that the Israelis, many Israelis are silent, or the left have died, or the progressives have died in Israel. I don't believe that. We have seen a lot of movements and a lot of protests, and it's happening as we speak inside Israel against annexations. We have seen polling, a lot of polling showing that Israelis are not happy with annexation. So we need not to also undermine the civil society in Israel that could move and will move against annexation. Now, on the Palestinian side, you have heard probably that the Palestinian leadership have decided to cancel all agreements with Israel, all existing agreements. That's true. The Palestinian leadership took this step. It's a very natural response because Israel, by announcing annexation, it's unilaterally pulling out of the existing agreements that we have with them. We cannot hold the agreements with Israel while Israel is not respecting the agreement. We cannot be the weak part in the agreements while Israel is ditching every part of the ink that's been written in these agreements. Israel already have violated the existing agreements with us. On civil coordination, they don't do any civil coordination directly with the PA. They have been violating this agreement since the last 10 years. On security, they stopped all criminal security coordination, all civil security coordination. They only kept one security, which is what we call the terrorism security and the exchange of information. And when it comes to the economic agreement, which is what we call Paris Protocol, that dictates the economic relation between Palestinians and Israelis, the Israelis already had undermined this agreement to the point that it's almost absolute. As a businessman, I'm telling you this. So reality today, the de facto reality by the Israelis is that there is no more respect of those agreements. And the agreements that have been canceled by the Palestinians today, it's not reflecting on the daily life of Palestinians as we're still living. And this is why many Palestinians within the Palestinian state is viewing these agreements as absolute and in need of change or in need of cancellation. Now, the strategy to cancel those agreements, it's because if you still keep holding on those agreements, you are telling your people annexation will happen, but I am keeping my agreements with Israel. This is not respected by the Palestinians. Majority of Palestinians and the Palestinian parties inside the PLO supported the move to cancel those agreements. But let's just make it clear a technical issue here. When we made the peace agreement with Israel in 1994, we had two agreements. First agreement is called the Declaration of Principle, which is the Oslo I, and it's a recognition, the mutual recognition between the PLO and Israel. Israel recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinians, and the PLO recognized Israel as a state. This agreement cannot be canceled. It's still operative because mutual recognition is important because the leadership in Ramallah believe in peace, and they understand that de-recognizing Israel is not a good step. But Oslo II, which is a technical agreement that includes civil, security, and economic relations, had been canceled. The Palestinians, after canceling this agreement, and if annexation is announced, will probably move into what we call a state under occupation. You probably have heard about this, and most people don't understand this. But I think if we have, and luckily we have legal experts here, it's a very important legal step. Why? 2012, we went to the UN. We went and got a membership in the UN as a non-member state of the UN. We already became a non-active or non-member in the UN and the resolution 19/67. In that recognition, they recognized the Palestinian state, and the government of the Palestinian state is the PLO, and they recognize that the PLO parliament is the parliament of the state. Now, the Palestinians will go into declaring a state under occupation based on 1967 border. What would that mean? This would mean that Israel now would, at least legally in the terms of the Palestinians, is occupying not a territory, but occupied another state. So, and also in this declaration, we will state that our borders is a 67 border. You understand, till today, Israel legally have not announced its borders. Right now, Israel did not legally announce what is exactly their borders. Meaning, if we go and we declare our border based on 67, we preserve the two-state solution. At the same time, we bring a new legal status, mainly with our legal track with the International Criminal Court and other Human Rights Council and so on, that we will move our status from a territory to a state. This will upgrade the legal status of our cases against Israeli army operation and so on in the territory, which will become a state. Also, it will give us the leverage to counter the PA and create a new entity that will have different agreements with the state of Israel. It will give some sort of preserving of the two-state solution, because we will expect more states to recognize this new entity of the Palestinian state under occupation. The Palestinians are not going to sit down and do nothing. And we learned from history that we have to do things, but non-violently. The idea that Palestinians will move into violence is never going to happen, in the West Bank at least. I can guarantee you that the Palestinian leadership is taking every measure possible to ensure that the response to annexation is only non-violent. Because we learned from violence. Violence brings more violence, brings more blood. Blood brings more hatred. We fought hard to bring this non-violent movement in the West Bank. And I believe that we will keep fighting for this non-violence movement to continue. Last point, before I run out of time, I think I have 1 minute, is that Hamas and Gaza, this elephant in the room that always comes out, and that's a very important issue to address. Let me just be very clear about what's going on in regard to Gaza and Hamas and so on. Hamas is a Palestinian party in the end. It's part of the Palestinian society. They exist. They're not only one or two people. And I think right now we see that Hamas also is trying to change its position. We have seen Hamas adapting a non-violent resistance approach by sending people toward the fence. We all heard about the fence. Hamas also is negotiating with Israel. We heard reports yesterday that they're trying to do a prisoners exchange agreement with Israel in regard to the Israeli soldiers, or we don't know if it's their bodies or them, with exchange of Palestinian prisoners. Third, Hamas had tried to entertain their charter in the last 2 years by trying to adapt an understanding of the existence of the state of Israel. I'm not marketing Hamas here, don't misunderstand. What I'm trying to say is that we need to bring people like Hamas into the PLO, where they accept the 3 conditions of the PLO, which is non-violence, recognition of the state of Israel, and negotiation, rather than isolating Hamas. We need to bring groups to become more legitimate and believing in non-violence and negotiation with Israel, rather than isolating them and make them more and more fanatic. This is what we need to do with Hamas. Unfortunately, the Israeli government is doing us a lot of negative on this. You have heard about the money that comes from Qatar through Israeli Ben Gurion airport that goes directly into Gaza. Today, in this era, let me just be frank on my last minute, and I will stop. The movement of non-violence, human rights, civil rights, peace in the West Bank is being rewarded by annexation, by economic downgrading, by undermining the PA, and by more and more occupation. While the government de facto in Gaza that's advocating rockets and violence is getting awarded of money, cash that comes through Ben Gurion airport, the same airport that you go into when you go into Israel. Cash comes in to Ben Gurion Airport from Qatar and goes in Israeli cars to Hamas. What kind of message I'm going to give to the young people here? What I'm going to tell them? I'm going to tell them that non-violence brings you peace? No, they're going to tell me, look, rockets bring money. Rockets bring Israel to its knees. So we are at a challenge. And you and your people and people like you are very important to ensure that people like us will be here forever, and we will be fighting the right fight to bring a two-state solution to this area. Thank you.
Many thanks, Bashar. That was incredibly lucid. I can see people are clapping hands. An incredibly lucid and clear exploration of what this annexation would mean for Palestinians, and also you provided us with an understanding as well as of what kind of response there would be. And I'm sure, and I'm going to invite people who are listening to please start putting questions down. You're welcome to put questions in the chat, and we'll take them. And also, if you put your name, we're also happy to unmute you for you to actually talk your question out. It's always nice to have an oral question as well. So I know I've got questions from your presentation, and I'm sure many of our audience will. So please welcome, and I invite you to start thinking of your questions. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our next speaker, Naomi Hazan. Welcome, shalom, and please, we would like to hear what's the thinking from Israel and Israeli left, of course.
Erev Tov, good evening. And thank you, David, for saying the Israeli left, because I think I'll be a very poor representative of the Israeli right. I would like very briefly to deal with 4 issues, or make it 3. Number 1, why one should oppose annexation. I really will do that in a couple of sentences. Number 2, I'll try to assess the factors that are at work at this point on whether annexation will happen or not, and give you my assessment. And third, I'll deal with some of the elements of when, how, what, when this happens, or should this happen. So let me start very briefly again with, I'm assuming that almost everybody on the call is opposed to unilateral annexation. And Bashar made my life much easier by highlighting some of the key reasons. But the first major reason is that it absolutely subjugates Palestinians, both on a collective basis and as individuals, and affects every aspect of their daily life. Annexation, frankly, is a gross violation of human rights. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 relates to the fact that in rules-based global order, annexation is a violation of international law and conventions. David pointed this out very well. And the truth of the matter is, it is considered to be a major act of aggression and actually a crime against humanity. So we have to put the legal aspect very strongly at the forefront. A third set of reasons is that unilateral annexation will destabilize an already unstable region. It will create shockwaves throughout the Middle East and, by extension, other parts of the world as well. And we have to look at the global and regional effects of annexation. But I would like to highlight a 4th reason, and that is annexation harms Israel very, very strongly and painfully. There is a consensus in the defense establishment that it will harm Israel's security. There are clear indications that it will harm Israel's already suffering economy. It is much clearer than we would like to believe that annexation will shatter what is already a fragile democracy in Israel. In very blunt terms, ruling over another people against their will is fundamentally undemocratic. And if we do that consciously, we are not only harming Palestinians, but we are harming and defying the foundational principles of Israel as ensconced in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. And this is really a very serious reason to oppose annexation. I would add that I think also that annexation is anti-Jewish. It shows no compassion for the other. And by not taking into account the other and being inclusive, one is truly, I think, acting against the Jewish tradition. So the Israeli and Jewish aspects of opposition to annexation, I think, are quite important, and it's necessary to remember them. If you put these four sets of reasons together, the impact on Palestinians, international law, fomenting insecurity, and the effects on Israel, there's a very powerful argument to oppose annexation. Now, having said that, it's June 30th. From tomorrow, according to the coalition agreement, Israel may take steps to annex portions of the West Bank unilaterally. And therefore, what's uppermost in people's mind is it going to happen? I'll give you part of the answer at the beginning, but wait for the end because the real answer is going to come in about 10 minutes. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, on July 1st. But there are several factors that one must follow in the next few days and weeks in order to really give an answer to the question of whether there will be unilateral annexation. And if I may, I will put them in 4 clusters. The first cluster relates to Israeli domestic politics, and I emphasize politics. Now, in that cluster, it's very important to remember that the far right is opposed to unilateral annexation according to the Trump plan because they think it's not enough. They would like to annex the entire area, but also because they're opposed to a Palestinian state. And in their mind, the Trump plan is an avenue to the creation of a Palestinian state. Parenthetically, I would just say that I don't know any state like the one that is suggested for Palestine in the Trump plan, but I'll close the parentheses. So there's a lot of tension between Netanyahu and the far right. Second element in domestic politics relates to the relationship between blue-white, Gantz, and the Likud. I think basically Gantz is not against some kind of annexation, but because of internal tensions within the government, he, in the last few days, has basically suggested that maybe now is not the right time. And that's part of a broader issue in Israeli politics, the stability of the Israeli coalition, and the fact that Netanyahu may be thinking about new elections or laying at least the foundations for new elections. So one set of factors is watch Israeli politics. A lot of what will or will not happen relates to the Israeli political scene. A second set or cluster of factors relates actually to the broader scene within Israel. The COVID-19 and the economic situation are really, really difficult at this moment. The Hebrew term is balagan. Everything is murky, and this is affecting a lot of things. Most people in Israel are not concerned with annexation. They're concerned with paying their bills and feeding their children, and they have health concerns as well. In every single poll we see, no more than 4% give the annexation issue any priority. And that's important to remember. In the same context, there's a dissonance between support for annexation in the public and in the Knesset. The Knesset, there's a clear majority if it goes to a vote. But that is definitely not true in the public. So if you put the general mood into the equation, annexing at this point will be seen as a diversion rather than anything else. So that's a second set of factors. A third set of factors relates to the international community. And let us say it very clearly now, there is an international consensus against annexation for all the reasons that we discussed earlier. And therefore, it's not just the EU and the Arab League and Jordan and maybe Egypt and the UN. It may also directly affect relations with the United States in an election year. So that's a third set of factors that will influence what will happen. And the final set of factors, and one which I normally do not emphasize, I have to be honest, in this case I'm forced to, these are personal factors. And we have at two sides of the ocean, Netanyahu and Trump, and frankly, what they agree on will happen. And we have to dig deeper into their mindsets and into their personal and political motivations in order to understand the outcomes. So if one looks at this list, there are variables here that I found that I've been watching very carefully, especially for the last 2 weeks. I hope to watch them as carefully in the days to come. So will it happen? Will it happen? Some people are suggesting that it won't. The evening news in Jerusalem today was, oh, there are too many complications. And I would caution very strongly against taking that kind of attitude at this juncture. In fact, I think it's part of a general strategy to lull the public, to make it not put this issue on the agenda, their agenda at the moment, and allow the government, and particularly Mr. Netanyahu, to make their decisions when they want. In fact, in general, there are attempts to confuse, to misdirect, and to deflect attention from the issue. The first, by the way, is very substantive. It's to say, what's the difference between occupation and annexation? And I think that we have to understand that there is an immense difference between occupation, which is wrong, and annexation, which is wrong, but which institutionalizes the situation. There's also an attempt, there will be an attempt to carry out or implement annexation in stages. For example, annex some settlement blocks around Jerusalem, small areas as a first step, and then roll out other parts of the annexation, the Jordan Valley settlements, deep inside Palestinian population areas as one goes on. In other words, to get one to say, oh, it's not so bad. But let me emphasize, even 1 meter of annexation is a violation of international law. It's wrong. And therefore, the rolling out is important because it's part of this tactic of making you feel it's not so bad, when the truth of the matter is, it's not as bad as you thought, but it's awful. And therefore, bottom line and last few sentences at this juncture, I do think that something will happen in the next 2 months, July, August, maybe in September. I think any form of annexation is by definition a game changer, and we still have a little more time to try and prevent it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Naomi, for that very lucid analysis. And I was hoping you might reach, as you were going through, a different conclusion. But sadly, as you say, there's a lot of political strategies being undertaken to try and deflect, and to initially say 1st of July, and then say, well, not really, and then and sort of suggest, oh, it's not so bad, and various things. So thank you very much for that analysis. And to both our speakers, I see we already have a range of questions. And so I think we're going to jump into them forthwith. And I'm going to take, rather than sort of put myself into it, I'm going to take from the floor. So if anyone, as I say, wants to ask a question themselves, they can put themselves in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to ask the questions from the chat. So we have a question. It's said for both panelists about how do we respond to the religious Zionist argument claiming that Israel isn't actually annexing any land because it is Israeli land to begin with. I think I imagine that this may be a sort of attempt to sort of respond to some of the arguments that are being laid out. Clearly, as Naomi, Hazan, and Bashar have said, there's no international law reason why it would in any way be said to be Israeli land. But I don't want to put words into the mouth of panelists. How would you like to respond? Bashar, what do you say to that?
I think I will have the other speaker, the professor, I'm sure she will answer this also. Let me just be clear about 2 points here. First, this question is derived from the idea that if you undermine and you ignore the existing peace agreement between the Palestinians and Israelis, the Palestinians and Jordanians, Israelis, Jordanians, and Israelis and Egyptians, that allocated that everything outside of the 1967 border is an occupied territory. The international law is saying that the EU parameters, even the US till end of Obama term, were claiming this is an occupied territory. So this question now is driven what I call from a theological approach. And I think we are undermining the theological aspect of this conflict in the era of Trump and Netanyahu, meaning the whole idea of the Trump plan was driven by 2 elements. One is theological, which is right-wing evangelical theological approach, and the right-wing national Zionist movement inside the settlements. This is a very important issue that many people are undermining. These people believe that what's so-called for you, the Judea and Samaria, what's called for us, the West Bank, is part of the state of Israel and theologically should connect to the Jewish people, and the sovereignty on them theologically should be connected to that state. And I think, I don't want to get into theology and why and where, and I think that if you are coming from a theological background, then I cannot argue with this, because you cannot sit down with somebody who's talking theology and argue, I come first or you come first, because then we're going to always have a problem of which year I came before you or after me. So if the issue is theological, I think what needs to be addressed in these days is what is the Jewish connection to the West Bank? Would Jews have the right to be part of the Palestinian state? Would the Jews, I'm talking about in a theological way, would the Palestinian state have Jewish community in it? Jewish Palestinians or Jewish citizens or Jewish residents who have the right to live in this area that is theologically connected to their faith? I think they do. I think they have the right to do that. As much as Palestinians have the right to live in an Israeli state. I know I'm going a bit different in my answer, because if you want to argue this answer theologically again, it's difficult to answer it because you will say this is all land of Israel, so there's no Palestinians. If you want to answer it politically, international law, existing agreements between Israel and Arab nations dictates that this is not part land of a part of the state of Israel. So you have to define the answer, the question, which way to be answered. Theologically, I cannot convince anybody that this is not the state of Israel or the land of Israel, because it's historically connected to that land, to that theology. So it's a very sensitive question. I think what we need to say...
Maybe can I ask you also, because often in Jewish audiences, people don't fully understand the depth of Palestinian connection to land. So maybe, you can tell us a little bit about, just from your own perspective, because people think we had this right for many, many years, but Palestinians I've met when I was in Palestine having centuries of connection to land. So perhaps you could talk to us a little bit about that.
And also we have holy sites. When you have the Muslims connection to what we call the tomb of Patriarch in Hebron. This is a Muslim mosque today. It's also been a holy site for the Jewish faith. You have a lot of, also the Joseph tomb, as you call it, in Nablus, which is we call Qabr Yusuf. It's also a shrine for us. So there is connection that is Islamic. Now, does the Jewish connection came before the Islamic connection, or the Jewish one came before? This question, we will never find the solution to it. Because if it's all about timing, then definitely the Jewish faith is before all other faiths. So the connection is also, to me, it's not only about theology and faith. It's also about rights and the right of land and the right of living in that land. Now, if you have As an example, in the city of Hebron, you've been there, many people go there. If you have a small community of settlers who are living there, dictating the life of 800,000 inhabitants of the whole governorate because of their conditions of controlling the downtown of Hebron, because of them living there, you can understand that the connection of land to Palestinians is beyond theology and politics. It's where you were born and raised. People were born and I don't want to go in centuries, because I think this argument will always be losing and winning. Somebody will be winning and losing. Nobody will be convinced. I want to talk about the right of those people who've been living in this land in the known history, born and raised in the known history. They have rights. They have human rights, civil rights, and right to own a property, and we are depriving them from that right. I think it's not only that we are connected. If we want to go back to Phoenicians and Ashurians and where the Palestinians came from, I'm sure we will sit down for 6 hours going into this and we will never succeed. We need to understand that this is the land inhabited by people, and those people have the right to be in that land. We already agree that those people have the right. Let me just say one thing that we need to understand, and before I move to my friend, having no Palestinian state will bring us to a de facto and apartheid that will end into civil rights, human rights movement by Palestinians calling for one state. Calling for one state means the whole Jewish dream will be over of having a Jewish state. Because if we fight for the next 10, 15, 20 years for civil rights, human rights, and general rights under the Israeli state, with also 1.6 million Palestinians inside Israel, you have 2.5 million people in Gaza, you have almost 3 million people in the West Bank. The current population of Arabs, Palestinians, between the land and the sea is almost equal to the number of Jewish inhabitants. Where are we going? We're going to go for a de facto one-state apartheid that will lead in the end for a civil rights, human rights movement that will bring us our rights, and then the whole dream of Jewish state is over. Well, then Palestinian state must come out now. If we want to talk about theology, we will not end up with a solution. We need to be inclusive. Let me just be clear about this. And I'm one of the few politicians who say this. We need to be inclusive of theology. We need to understand the theological connection of Muslims, Christians, and Jews to this land. But we should not be dictated by theology, especially when it violates human rights, civil rights, and the right of people to be living as equal human beings.
Okay, that was a fascinating answer. Naomi, do you want to weigh in on this question of a maximalist position?
Come again on the question, because I think Bashar answered everything. But
okay, so if you don't want to weigh in on that, I'm going to go to another question which asks about the strategies to bring pressure on Israel. Like there is, I think, a degree of frustration in the diaspora around what do we actually do when Israel's doing things that seem to violate international law, go against any norms and standards of the international community. And the question specifically asks about sanctions or BDS. But I suppose it is a wider question about what kind of strategy do you think would work to have an effect in relation to, on Israel in some ways?
let me answer that broadly and then specifically, if I may. And I think it will evoke a discussion, because that's the kind of question we should explore very deeply together. But the broad analysis is we're at a stage that I don't recall since the creation of the State of Israel. And that is, there is a serious normative gap between the bulk of Jews outside of Israel and the policies of the State of Israel. And there is growing discomfort. We see it everywhere. Increasingly, and I think you understand this in South Africa better than most, by the way, definitely better than most in Israel, increasingly, liberal democratic values and Jewish identity are merged in many parts of the world. And one doesn't see oneself as a good Jew if one is not inclusive and respectful of the other and of diversity. In the United States, one's seeing that connection very, very strongly. In the UK as well, and portions of Western Europe too. So the gap is growing. And that raises the broader issue of what indeed is the connection and how does one make this an interchange? I'm leaving the broader question hanging in the air on purpose and then responding to your distinct question. You cannot love somebody without calling them to task if you think they're doing things that are harmful to themselves, harmful to other people, harmful to you. It's almost as simple and as profound as that. And therefore, remaining silent is actually not caring about Israel at all at this point. Speaking out is very important. And I think the speaking out is slowly beginning to sink in as well in Israeli circles. It's not so comfortable to hear that your relatives abroad don't agree with you. And actually, they have quite good arguments for doing so. Now, what does that mean in real terms? It's so hard to embrace and at the same time disagree. And that's what one has to deal with. Up to now, for those in this dilemma, it has been not too difficult to not support settlements or purchase settlement products while supporting Israel. Because the distinction between Israel and the occupied territories was very clear. If there is annexation, that distinction will become blurred and it will make it much more difficult and will necessitate confronting the issue of not differentiated measures, but of measures against Israel. And that's not something that I would like us to have to deal with. By the way, if one's looking for another reason to prevent that annexation, that's a beautiful reason to do so.
Thank you so much. And I think there was a question, but I think you've actually answered it. No, I mean, your answer about the Jewish diaspora and getting involved. There is actually an interesting question here, Bashar, about the voice of the Palestinian diaspora on these issues, and specifically their engagement lobbying with the PA and the PLO. I know you're on the PLO Council, National Council. Can you tell us a little bit about that? One of the interesting facets I think many Jews don't understand is that Palestinian leadership doesn't only represent the people in the West Bank and Gaza, but also Palestinian diaspora. So perhaps you can engage a little bit with that.
Yeah, I mean, you placed well. The PLO is representative of it. The PLO is like the Jewish agency. It's like for all, it's for all Jews, and the PLO is for all Palestinians, regardless of their place of residence. And every Palestinian, regardless where they are a de facto member in the PLO. That's a very important issue. Let me just be clear about the Palestinian diaspora. I see in the West, in the US, in Europe, we don't have a large diaspora in South Africa, but in Australia, I see a very close relative relationship between progressives in the Jewish diaspora and Palestinian diaspora. It's a growing relationship. And this growing relationship is growing mainly in campuses, on university campuses, and on civil rights movements that are connected to the countries where they're at, as well as because those young generation is having a lot of common grounds, a lot of common causes that's not connected directly only to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but also connected to the current issue that this generation is having. So I am saying, that, which is also very important, is that we need a closer relationship between Palestinian and Arab diaspora with the Jewish diaspora who believe in the same cause of the right of Palestinians to have the state and the civil rights, human rights, and freedom, justice, and dignity for the Palestinians. That's a very important issue, because if we unite also in diaspora into this issue, I think that would bring even a deeper effect on both sides when it comes to pushing for peace. Now, Palestinian diaspora, as you know, is merely newly organized, especially by the third, fourth generation of immigrants who are living mainly in the West. And but the new generation is being very vocal, very open toward human rights, civil rights, for justice, freedom, and dignity for the Palestinians. I can tell you that many of the young generation in diaspora, they are more into what we call a one-state solution. They want the civil rights, human rights, dignity, justice, freedom, and they don't care if it's a Palestinian state, if it's what. They want a model where we get those rights. And we are doing a lot of education to inform them and get them to understand what does it mean to have a Palestinian state and a Palestinian identity. Now, the Palestinian diaspora is very active, very powerful. They are growing and growing more pro-peace in general, but because many of them feel that the Palestinians are not getting their right, they're also becoming extreme in their views. So what we are working with Palestinians diaspora is to ensure that we are all symmetric between West Bank, Gaza, Amman, Lebanon, Damascus, and as well as Seattle and London and Berlin in what I call the joint Palestinian national vision. We are still, and you have to understand this, and many of your friends and viewers, and many, not only Jewish community, but a lot of internationals and even Israelis don't understand one single important thing, is that we are not a state yet. We are still a liberation movement. Yeah, we are against violence, but we are not a state. We are a liberation movement, and liberation movement make mistakes. Liberation movements do things wrong. Liberation movement listens, learns, and develop. The idea that the Palestinians are state in a sense of a nation is wrong. Once we are a state, you can start measuring us. You can start calculating our rights and wrongs, our democracy and lack of democracy. But you cannot come to an occupied people who don't have rights and ask them to act like Israelis do in a democracy where they have a full state and they have a full rights. It's really a wrong way of measuring the Palestinians. So this is why I'm telling you that with diaspora, we have a long way to go. We are working with them. Many of them understand that they are supporting us economically. They're supporting peaceful resolution to the Palestinian cause. Many diaspora, especially in the West, in Europe and the US, even the traditional Muslims within the Palestinian diaspora are clearly understandable of the situation today, and they do want to support the creation of a Palestinian state. We have to do a lot of internal house cleaning and internal house fixing by bringing the Palestinian united back again. bringing the West Bank and Gaza together. Listen, I can tell you that if we don't do a united Palestinian reconciliation with Gaza, it's going to be also an impediment for a Palestinian state. So we do have our own problems that we need to deal with. But it's very normal for liberation movements to have disagreements that could lead to division. The Jewish community, the Jewish diaspora before the creation of the State of Israel, they had a lot of disagreements, and they still have disagreements. We have countries who have disagreements, but we are trying to reestablish a better relationship with diaspora. And also we understand that this diaspora community, we're learning a lot from what the Jewish diaspora community is doing in funding hospitals, in funding the community, in funding activities. And we are learning from this and we are working with them. But we need them to trust us more, and we're trying to make them trust us more. But I think a symmetric relationship with the Jewish community that will bring a Palestinian state is something that's needed.
Thank you, Bashar, for that extensive answer. And I think I want to take a question about, actually, you talked about the relationship in the diaspora between Jews and Palestinians. And I think certainly, one thing that those of us who want to go for peace, we need to think of stronger ways to cooperate. And there often have been very divisive things that have pushed the people apart. But one question here is about the relationship and bonds at the grassroots between Palestinians and Israelis, because the worry is that certainly something I saw when I was for a period in Israel was that people are cut off and they don't really know about each other's realities, and that's the effect of the long period now of the communities not really strongly interacting. So Naomi, do you want to perhaps tell us a little bit about that connection between Israelis and Palestinians, and do you see that as something that can improve in the future?
Thank you for that question. Okay. I keep getting instructions about muting and unmuting.
We can hear you. Great.
It's a very good question. And again, I'd like to answer that question on two levels. Because as someone who has been directly involved with many Palestinian colleagues for, I'm embarrassed to say, almost 50 years, it's a question of my age. I frankly don't recall a period of such a lack of communication and meeting as we have now. In other words, there's almost a break, a complete break. People that we met with regularly 4, 5, 2 years ago is not happening now. It's become much more complicated, also because of the COVID. In the last few months, it's even worse. So this is not a good period in Israeli-Palestinian relations on many levels. By the way, there used to be a lot of meetings outside Israel, which allowed diaspora Palestinians and Palestinians from the occupied territories to meet with Israelis and Israeli diaspora leaders a little bit, but almost much less than in the past. The break here is serious. One can analyze that if one had the time, but I want to directly answer the second level, and that is, what is taking place now? Is there anything taking place now? And my answer is yes, but in very clear areas and pockets of activity. There is some grassroots activity. For example, against Khan el-Ahmar last year in the southern Hebron Hills, where there's joint Israeli-Palestinian activity. There have been some Israeli missions to Ramallah. There is an Israeli delegation going tomorrow to the Jordan Valley, to Jericho. One of the most actually inspiring events of the last few months was on Memorial Day evening, Memorial Day, where the bereaved family circle and combatants for peace, Palestinian and Israelis, held a virtual memorial that had 180,000 participants, saying very clearly, we're all suffering from the conflict. Let's put a stop to this. And by the way, the effects of that are not lost in a period of uncertainty on large publics. So I would say that there are pockets. There's some amazing Arab Jewish organizations within Israel, such as Standing Together, that are doing important grassroots work. There have been demonstrations within Israel every single day for the last few weeks against occupation. These are Palestinian, Israeli, Jewish demonstrations against annexation. In other words, civil society is awakening within Israel. There are contacts, but it will take a long time to build up the kind of trust that existed even on the grassroots level a few years ago. And I think part of the challenge of confronting the political situation is exactly to build up this grassroots support, because I'm not sure it's going to come from politicians at this stage.
Yeah, and if I may, from a South African point of view, when one moves towards conflict resolution, of course, it requires a leadership to do that, but there's steps that need to be taken on both sides to build that sense of trust that one can move forward together into a better resolution. So it's one of the things that perhaps we haven't explored enough is the South African, the lessons. We do not claim to be perfect, but the lessons that we can learn from the South African transition and others such as in Colombia around these issues. So Bashar, there was one question as well about if annexation goes ahead. I know you talked about the state under occupation, but the question here is about, will the Palestinian Authority in fact collapse? Will people say, well, we will revert and force Israel to reoccupy and then assert its whole authority essentially over the area, which it really, the right wing is not particularly keen to do. So what do you think about that scenario?
Well, annexation is, for the Palestinian, is the end of the current process, and means that there is no valid Palestinian state that could be created with annexation. And accepting annexation or continuing the Palestinian Authority status after annexation, it means that we are accepting annexation. So definitely the PA and its structure related to Oslo have to be dismantled. That doesn't mean that when you create a state under occupation, you still serve your people. You still have what we call a government, but that's the government of the state, and the state is occupied by Israel, and Israel have the upper responsibility of taking care of those who are occupied in the state. It's I'm not telling you that this thing is ready today. This thing is under study by the Palestinian leadership as we speak today. Most people have to understand there's a difference between Gaza and the West Bank. Gaza is a one big block with borders with Israel. That block is completely no incursions by Israelis, there's no settlements. So it's a complete block. The West Bank is not a block anymore. With settlements, you have a settlement here and a village here, you have a road here and a road there. So it's impossible to have what I call a contiguous Palestinian solution away from Oslo today. It's impossible. So the Palestinian state under occupation will keep some sort of legitimacy of the leadership of the Palestinians, but will throw the big management issue into the Israeli hands. Now, the PA cannot operate in the way it is today, meaning people perception of the current of the PA today is becoming as a middleman between the Israelis and the people. And the middleman is not the state that we are dreaming of. A middleman is not what we want to be for the Israelis, with all respect to Israel. We don't want to be the middleman. We don't want to be the southern army of Lebanon that used to work with Israel. We're not going to arrest our kids on behalf of the Israelis. We are not going to do the Israelis dirty work. This is not going to happen. So the PA status is already being undermined by Israel. The Israeli COGAT authority, which is the Israeli Army Authority of Civil Affairs in the West Bank, had increased the number of employees lately in the last 3 years. They are the de facto government today on everything. If we need to move from area A to B or from point A to B, we need their permission. The current situation dictates the following. Israel is the upper hand, the PA is the middleman. We cannot operate as a middleman anymore. I think this will place us into a situation where we need to define our national movement as a liberation organization. What is it that we want? Are we going to go and keep pushing for a two-state solution? Or we, as younger generation, who are calling for one state, are going to take the responsibility and say, that's it. I'm telling you, it's a unique time. Person like Abu Mazen, and I'm sure Naomi, Professor Naomi will talk about this. He's a person who have fought for nonviolence against all odds. He is publicly stating, I am against violence, being called traitor by Palestinians. Second, he believes only in negotiation, and he still hopes for peace. But I don't know if Abu Mazen, God forbid, he's an old man and we have changed, well, who else will come afterward? What I'm trying to say, this window of opportunity is closing. And if we move into a state under occupation, we are preserving the two-state solution by saying there is a Palestinian state. It's the only way we can preserve this, hoping for change in the US and change in Israel that will bring us a state. But this hoping process is not going to continue in the Palestinian side forever. We, as a younger generation, are not going to wait for those rights to come out of election in Israel or election in the US. We will take the matter into our hands non-violently by calling for a civil rights, human rights movement under the Israeli state. And yes, we will fight for 5-10 years and then we will get our full rights. But we will be, I'm sure we will be having a lot of people working with us on this inside Israel, from the Israeli Jewish community who believe that we should have our rights. Just to point out one thing, the end of the peace process today is in the hands of the White House and Tel Aviv. And if they want to end it, what we will do with the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza? What? We are not going anywhere. Israelis are not going anywhere. We need to find a solution. And we have to understand that this solution, let me just be very clear. If Tel Aviv and Israelis are waiting for it, sorry, with all respect, evangelicals, to decide the fate of their state, well, I think you have no dream anymore. Really, it's absurd. I think it's absurd to see the Israeli future and fate being decided by some crazy theological approaches that is actually not, it's been depriving of its Jewish identity. And last point I want to mention, I just want to go back to the first question you asked Professor Naomi about Palestinian-Israeli grassroots. I look at the picture in a different way sometimes. The fight that Professor Naomi and people like her who've been doing and still doing till today need to be not undermined and need to be valued. Israeli media is undermining them, saying that they don't exist. You hear it, diplomats saying right wing in Israel, left wing and people who believe in peace don't exist. No, they do exist. And they exist in large numbers. Maybe they have different opinions, but they do exist. And I think we need to show them out to the world. But there's important elements here. Every day, almost 200,000 Palestinians cross to Israel. as workers and marshals. We have 1.67 million Palestinians inside Israel. We have daily contact between Israelis and Palestinians. We need to develop this contact from what we call a business to business or worker to employer or employer to worker relationship to talk about the situation. If we find creative way with the social media to bring this exposure of two nations, we need to do it now. Israel is a state of art when it comes to high tech. Why not to develop high tech that could bring people together? Why not to utilize this existing 200,000 people that cross the border every day? We need to think outside of the box of how we can get people together. We need to think differently when it comes to this issue. So this is how I see the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. And those are quite stirring words, because I think one of the things people lose sight of is the opportunities that actually exist here for Israeli-Palestinian cooperation, and actually the betterment of the of both Palestine and Israel that could happen under a more positive scenario. I do remember, as I was just finishing school, the Oslo process took place, and there was a time where there was different dreams which seem to have receded a bit. And it's sad to me that often younger people seem to be even more conservative in some ways in believing in the possibility of a different future. So we're going to move into a closing opportunity for you both to have statements. I know there are other questions that have been asked. I know some people are asking Bashar what you think will happen in the Palestinian areas, occupied territories post, if it does happen. And Naomi, some people are asking about the two-state solution and its future. I'm going to say to you, think about the day after annexation, and perhaps you want to make a few closing comments about that. If it happens, where do we go? Is there hope? How do we resolve this conflict? And you can address some of those questions as part of it. Before I give you your chance for a closing remark, I just wanted to ask Gabby, who's been so fantastic in organizing so much of what JDI is doing and is a young activist, to speak to us just about what you can do practically at the moment to align yourself with anti-annexation and pro-peace movement. So Neville, if you can just unmute Gabby, and Gabby, just tell us briefly about the things you wish to address us on, and then we'll have the closing comments.
Sure. Thank you, David. And thank you to both of you for speaking tonight. I just want to make a few calls. The first is that if you'd like to become a member of JDI, the membership fee is 360 Rand and 18 Rand for students and pensioners. And I'll put the email address in the chat now if you'd like to become a member. We also have a website, jdisa.org, which has more resources on annexation and how you can get involved. And the last thing is to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, both of which are JDI movements. And lastly, if you'd like to get involved in terms of hosting an event or participating to a greater extent, please also email us in the email address that I'll link here. And then the last thing is just to say, again, to reiterate the importance of making South African voices heard on this issue and signing the petition that I'll also link in the chat. And thank you again to all the speakers, to both of you for speaking tonight. We're very honored to have had you here.
Thank you, Gabby. So first, I'm going to ask Naomi to your thoughts in closing on the day after, and can we rescue a hope for peace?
The answer to your second question, can we rescue the hopes for peace? My answer has always been, we have no choice. The two people occupy the land, live on the land. We have to learn to live with each other and live together. And if we don't, we'll do a very good job at destroying each other. So it's not a question. What we do have to do is be much more effective in doing precisely that and finding ways to do so, which leads me directly to the issue of the two-state solution. There are lots of variants now of the two-state solution. We're hearing a lot about a one-state solution. But the truth of the matter is that the most interesting thing is finding ways of respecting each other's right to self-determination and cooperating at the same time. So the notion of an open two-state solution with a lot of interchange, I think, is very important, and that we can develop intellectually and practically. There's some really interesting initiatives, and I would pursue them. The big mistake of Oslo was that the notion of a two-state solution was seen as separation instead of interaction. If we think of it more clearly in terms of interaction, I think that's a very fruitful avenue to pursue. On another level, it's I think it's important for all of us to loosen up a little on the interchange. Having 200,000 Palestinian workers in Israel does not mean there's an interchange when that kind of presence is asymmetrical by definition. And we must find ways of a symmetrical kind of interaction, of leveling the playing fields. And Bashar, I appreciate your worrying about my safety, but at this stage, everything bad that could be said about me has already been said, so nothing surprises me. I sometimes worry that some of my Palestinian friends are a little bit more reserved because they too have a constituency and are not as open as you've been. So I think we all have to try much harder than we have. And the reason is, the third point in the closing presentation here for me is the answer is not in Washington. The answer lies in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv and in Ramallah and in Jericho. And at some point or another, if we succeed in resolving our dispute, it's because we've agreed to do so together. And the challenge is to get back to the table. And by the way, I think the most important thing at this juncture is to do precisely that. So let's make another effort, and if necessary, another effort, because ultimately we will succeed. It's the only thing that's going to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. And so, Bashar, your thoughts in your closing statement on the day after and thoughts for the future and hope.
I mean, I really couldn't add much to Professor Naomi's closing remarks, where I completely agree with, and I think I don't want to repeat them because I think they were magnificent and clear. I like to add 2 points. One is the Jewish community. You need to move from defense to offense. It's time, and you started this by supporting petitions and so on, but we need you to do more. When you come to Israel, you need to come to the Palestinian side. You need to come and see how the Palestinians are living in refugee camps, how the Palestinians are being, land being confiscated, natural resources, the wall, the restrictions, the access and movement. I think that it's important thing that you take a major role, and by showing and moving forward in more aggressive approach toward voicing out your position. On the day after, we are going nowhere. We are going nowhere. Israelis are going nowhere. The problem is not going anywhere. Somebody might be happy in Washington or here or there, but in the end, the problem exists. We still have a way to fight to bring an end to this problem. And that is only through peace. Any other option will be ugly, will be disgusting, and we have to pay a price for both sides. So we need to be sure that we preserve this option as the only option to bring an end to this conflict. We will do everything possible in the right means and the moral means to bring an end to this conflict. We will not use anything other than that. But let's make it clear that we as Palestinians cannot wait for years to bring our rights back. We will not wait millions of years and thousands of years and hundreds of years or even tens of years. I think it's time that we will take all needed measures to move into getting justice, freedom, and dignity for us. And that might mean a way to move toward the one state that's not good for the Jewish dream, but we have to. I tell you that we are, even if one two-stater believer like me, believe I'm not going to hold the horses that long, and then we have to move into a civil rights movement. And then it will be a complete different narrative. We will meet and we will Zoom, but we will be talking about different narrative. We will avoid the national narrative and we'll be talking about my right as a human being under this state. To stop this from happening, we have to push for peace, a state, a Palestinian state, and this is the last moments of doing this. So I hope that the day next after annexation, even if we end the PA and we create state under occupation, and Israel becomes more and more responsible for the territory, even if this will look as an end of the light of the tunnel, no, I think we still can create a light. Israel might have change that will bring, as the professor mentioned, Tel Aviv, Ramallah, Jerusalem, and Gaza together. So we have to keep dragging in the hope, or otherwise we have a situation that we all would not be happy for.
Bashar, thank you so much. And I think what I must say, we're on the cusp of a changing moment, and a moment which in many ways can feel very depressing. But I think tonight's discussion has actually given me an uplifting feeling, because we have two people here of such a high caliber, and one just wishes that people like Bashar Azzeh and Naomi Hazan were negotiating a peace agreement, because I think we would get there. I think the important message, and I think this happened certainly in Israel, I think to some extent a sense of despair that it cannot happen. It can happen. The people of goodwill. And I think the key question is to reach out and find a way. Unilateral measures are not going to work. We are very grateful to you for spending time with us. I'm going to ask people to whether put jazz hands or put thank yous into the chat, and you can see the expressions of appreciation in the chat, and some clapping, as you can see, going on as well when people are thanking you very much. It's quite clear annexation is going to be terribly detrimental for both Israel and Palestine. We hope it doesn't happen, but even if it doesn't, there's done that we need to find a way through. I think many of us feel passionately that we can do it. I think we've heard two people say that. It's possible. And I think we take your challenge, Bashar, that the Jewish diaspora, we haven't seen such an outpouring before of support from really the top leaders of Jewish communities now, saying this is not the kind of Israel we want, and we want to reach an agreement with Palestinians. And that has galvanized, and I hope that that's going to continue in the future. And perhaps this moment where there's a threat here will actually create the seeds for something new, for something developing. So thank you again. Please, everyone, sign the petition if you're in South Africa, get involved in activities that will prevent annexation, and also, more importantly, drive peace between Israelis and Palestinians in a positive direction. We reach out to everyone who is in that and seeks to achieve that. So once again, thank you very much, and good night.
Good night, everybody. I'm going to be signing off in 30 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think, Neville, a few people are writing messages, so just